You know, when we picture Germany's war machine, our minds usually jump to those powerful tanks and screaming dive bombers. But behind all that firepower were the unsung heroes. Or, in this case, the machines that kept them all running. This is a story about incredible industrial might, but also about a brutal reality and a massive lesson in what it really takes to win a war.
It all kind of starts with a number like this one, over 130,000. That's how many Opel Blitz trucks, the real workhorse of the German army, were pumped out. It's just a staggering figure, right? It speaks to this incredible industrial power, this ability to churn out the engines of war on a massive scale. But, as we're about to see, just building the stuff is only a tiny part of the story.
Okay, so you've heard of the Blitzkrieg, the Lightning War. The whole German strategy early on was built on one single thing: speed. Panzer divisions would just punch a hole in the enemy lines and race deep into their territory. It was absolutely revolutionary, but it also created this huge vulnerability. You see, every single tank, every soldier was totally dependent on this long, thin tail of supply trucks, stretching all the way back to Germany.
So, to feed this super high-speed advance, industrial powerhouses like Opel, Mercedes-Benz, and Krupp had to shift their production into overdrive. They created this huge, varied fleet of vehicles, and each one was designed to play a specific part in keeping the tip of that spear sharp and fueled up.
All right, so let's meet the key players. These weren't the glamorous machines, that's for sure, but they were the absolute backbone of the army. We're going to take a look at the three most iconic trucks that really powered the German advance all across Europe. First up, the legend itself, the Opel Blitz. Seriously, if you've ever seen a photograph of a German supply column, you have definitely seen this truck. It was so common, so completely essential, that it pretty much just became the standard 3-ton truck of the Wehrmacht.
Now, what's really interesting here is why the Blitz was so successful. I mean, the sheer numbers, of course, but it was also the design. It was rugged, it was simple to fix, and, this is crucial, its gasoline engine was way easier to start in cold weather than a lot of its diesel counterparts. That little feature would become grimly important later on. Next, we've got a truck from another one of Germany's industrial giants, the Mercedes-Benz L3000. So while the Opel Blitz was kind of the jack of all trades, this vehicle earned a reputation for being exceptionally tough. It had the same 3-ton capacity as the Blitz, but the diesel-powered L3000 was a beast. It proved itself to be unbelievably reliable, especially in those harsh, sandy conditions of North Africa with Rommel's Africa Corp. It was a real testament to that famous Mercedes engineering. And finally, we have the most distinctive-looking one of the bunch, the Krupp Protzi. Now, this wasn't your standard cargo truck. It was a specialist vehicle, designed for a very specific and very vital role right on the battlefield. Okay, let's break this down. The Protzi was a light, 6-wheeled, all-terrain vehicle. Its main job was to be an artillery tractor, towing anti-tank guns and infantry support guns right up to the front lines where they were needed. It was super agile, handled rough ground like a dream, but it had a serious drinking problem. This thing was notoriously fuel-hungry.
So, there you have it, this pretty impressive array of German engineering. Reliable trucks, tough trucks, specialized vehicles. They've already conquered Poland, France, the Balkans. They just seemed completely unstoppable. But then came the ultimate test. What happens when you throw this finely tuned machine against the immense, unforgiving landscape of the Soviet Union?
In June of 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. And this was warfare on a scale the world had just never seen. The front was enormous, the distances were absolutely staggering. This wasn't just a test of soldiers, it was the ultimate, brutal test of supply lines.
And this slide just perfectly illustrates the huge disconnect. German High Command planned for a short, sharp war. They thought it'd be over in 4 months, victory before the first snowflake even fell. But the reality? Supply lines stretched to a breaking point. We're talking 1,600 kilometers. And you had an army that was totally unprepared for the brutal Russian winter, with temperatures dropping to 40 below zero.
What happened next wasn't just a military setback. It was a complete and catastrophic failure of the entire logistical system. Those steel workhorses we just met, they were about to be brought to their knees, and not by enemy tanks or guns, but by something much more basic.
And here is a hugely important point. There was no standard truck. I mean, just look at this. A single division might be using 162 different models of vehicles. An artillery regiment could have 69 different kinds of lorries. This wasn't just Opel and Mercedes anymore. It was a chaotic mix from countless different manufacturers. Now just try to imagine you're a mechanic trying to find one specific spare part in that mess, thousands of kilometers from home. Good luck.
This quote from a historical analysis really just sums it all up, doesn't it? It wasn't just a problem, it was a completely unsolvable crisis. When a truck broke down, it was often just stripped for parts or flat out abandoned. The logistical system was literally eating itself alive.
And the problems just kept piling on top of each other. Besides the spare parts nightmare, the few roads that existed turned into rivers of mud. The railways couldn't help either. They were a different size, a wider gauge. So this supposedly modern, mechanized army ended up depending on over 600,000 horses. Think about that. By August, just 2 months into the campaign, the entire motorized supply system was basically broken.
And then, winter came. Just look at this chart. That temperature drop is just insane. From a pretty pleasant summer, it plunged to an average of -15 Fahrenheit, with lows hitting a devastating -40. Vehicle lubricants froze solid. Engines wouldn't start. Even the weapons seized up. The machine itself literally froze.
This mechanical failure was matched by a total failure to prepare for the human cost. Because they believed the war would be a quick summer victory, the army had issued no winter clothing. None. Soldiers were facing one of the coldest winters on record, wearing their summer uniforms.
And this right here is the direct, horrific result of that logistical failure. You had soldiers stuffing newspaper into their clothes just for a tiny bit of insulation. The result was over 14,000 amputations from frostbite alone, a devastating price paid not because of the enemy, but because of a broken supply chain.
The situation got so desperate that Hitler himself was forced to choose. With very limited transport capacity, he could only send one of 3 critical things to the front: ammunition, food, or warm clothing. He chose ammunition. He chose to let his soldiers freeze and starve.
So what's the big takeaway from all of this? Well, it wasn't about one faulty truck model or a single bad decision. It was about the catastrophic failure of an entire system. It revealed the basic truth that an army's ability to fight is directly and completely tied to its ability to be supplied. And that brings us to the core lesson of this entire explainer: logistical acumen. It's this critical skill of understanding the cold, hard math of supplies. It's what separates a bold and successful commander from a reckless one. And the German High Command in 1941 showed an absolutely fatal lack of it. And that leaves us with one final question to think about. We are so often fascinated by the sharp end of military power, the tanks, the guns, the planes. But the story of the Wehrmacht's trucks on the Eastern Front really forces you to ask, is an army's greatest weapon the one that fires the bullets, or is it the one that delivers them?